Tanager is here for children, teens, young adults, and families as they navigate the many stressors of the world today. Tanager inspires, empowers, and heals by providing tools and support needed to navigate the hardships of life and overcome obstacles. Our expertise and specialty trainings offer a wide range of approaches, and we'll join alongside you to create solutions to enhance your wellness. We are here for you and your family. Tanager, inspire, empower, heal.
Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning proudly present Together We Rise, a series based on the RISE Wellness and Resilience framework. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this show is a series digging deep and bearing witness to the stories regarding challenges that youth and vulnerable populations face within systems in our community. We hope this series will inspire hope and possibility to create a ripple effect, empowering community action and encouraging you to recognize the power of advocacy. The power of your voice can be a shining light, promoting change in systems that can better offer resilience and wellness in the life of youth and families. Because when we call on our courage and show up in the midst of barriers, we offer a bright place, inspiring ourselves and others to recognize that hope is possible and to not give up, because the youth of today and future generations need us. Together we can rise. Laura, thank you so much for being here with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me. I'm Laura Medberry. I work at College Community Schools. I'm the Executive Director of Learning Supports. And I've been in schools my whole professional life as a teacher, as a principal here at Prairie and in another district. And in my role of Learning Supports, I support health services and school counselors. I support our school-based mental health initiative and a lot of other hats too, but those are some of my primary ones.
Yeah, wow. Lots of experience then. You know, a huge part of this initiative is just bringing awareness and advocacy in regards to a lot of the systems that youth in our communities face. And we know that education is probably one of the biggest pieces of a youth's life. And you know, Laura, I thought directly of you when thinking of mental health and social emotional learning in schools, because that is something that you work so hard on and have built systems around. Tell me a little bit about, within your experience, and especially over the last 5 to 10 years, what you have seen as some of the greatest needs related to educational settings and mental health and social emotional learning.
Yeah, I would say that educators over the last 5 to 10 years have become increasingly aware that if students don't have a good foundation of social emotional skills and mental wellness, that makes learning very, very hard. And there have been lots of adversities that kids have faced. COVID is just one, it's one major one. But there's a lot of adversities that kids have faced, increasingly so, over the last 5 to 10 years. So as a school system, we've been challenged with making sure we can do both prevention but also response to the mental health needs that our kids are facing.
Yeah. What do you guys see as some of those large needs? You know, I just think about, you know, a kid enters into kindergarten and is really expected to be able to sit and be kind, caring, respectful, be able to follow expectations and rules. And we're just finding out, you know, like, this is not really the reality that we're experiencing in schools. What do you see as what's going on with that?
Yeah, I would say preschool and kindergarten teachers have known for a long time that when kids come to school, there's a lot that they need to be taught as far as school expectations, and that's really true every year. I would say the piece that's different that I think is we're having more community awareness around is that mental illness knows no boundaries in terms of age and economic factors and things like that, and that the adversity that happens in our homes and in our communities has a direct impact on a student's developing brain. And so while we've always taught those things that you mentioned, we also know now that students have stressors in their lives, and some kids have had those for ages and ages, but now more students have a wider variety of stressors earlier on in their lives, and that makes learning a challenge, and so we have to respond as a school system to support students, what they aren't getting at home, what they had at home but needs a little bit more support, and partnering with families along the way to make sure they're getting what they need.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 years ago a study came out by the Surgeon General that called essentially children's mental health a crisis, and I think the data even pre-COVID was every 1 in 5 children have a mental health diagnosis, and I'd say now post-COVID and some of the stressors that we've seen, that is looking even more concerning. And so you said early on that it's really hard at times to educate a student who is really struggling with a lot of these barriers. So how are we meeting kids where they are? What are things that need to be happening in schools so that we can address and help children grow with their social emotional learning, their emotional intelligence, so that they can then lean into that intelligence or ability to learn and go on into life being really pro-social, successful adults?
In education, just like in public health, we think about different tiers of support. And so one of the tiers is the foundational tier. We call it Tier 1 in schools. And when I think of the question you just asked from a Tier 1 lens, what do we need to do? We need to ensure that every teacher and every school adult in every classroom and every common area really understands what students are dealing with. They don't need to know the specifics of what's happening in a student's home or what they're kind of going through emotionally, but they do need to know that there's a potential that there could be something. Because if we interact with all students, assuming that they've got a lot going on, that's certainly not going to hurt the students that actually do have it pretty good outside of school and aren't struggling with mental illness or other stressors. So the ways that we do that in school systems is by thinking about what are the most predictable environments that we can provide for kids. How do we make sure that, there's certain ways that kids can interact with an adult that for whatever reason are very stressful. So like public admonishment or calling a student out for something that they've done wrong. That's not good for any student. It's really problematic for kids that have other stressors that can send them into a fight, flight, or freeze response pretty easily. So that's all Tier 1. We don't need to know anything about what a student's going through to enhance our Tier 1 practices. Then beyond that, we have more and more partnerships. We've really focused as a school system on diversifying the mental health supports that are available to kids. Schools have had school counselors for ages and ages. Our school counselors don't provide long-term therapeutic services, but they are certainly well-equipped and well-educated to provide individual and small group counseling for a short period of time. And then beyond that, referring families and students to therapy providers in the community, medication managers. Educators don't have that level of expertise, or we're not hired to provide that level of service. So we're well networked within the community for provision of those services. And we have school-based services at school so that students that have transportation barriers or just really struggle with the school environment, we have therapists within our schools with our Tanager partnership to provide those supports.
Laura, you talk about this Tier 1, and when I think about what you said, it's just like it is important that we have certain practices that we apply to all students. And I just think, as a mother, even if maybe my child isn't struggling, why is it important that we are explicitly trying to cultivate social emotional learning in education? Why does that benefit all students?
Our employers have told us for a long time, ages and ages. The research goes back very, very far. A lot of times nowadays they'll say, we'll train them on these skills. These are job-specific things. We need kids to come to us with solid interpersonal skills. We need them to understand the importance of working hard. We need them to be able to listen and process what they're hearing and take initiative, have a sense of self-leadership. Our employers really need our children to be able to do that when they enter the workforce. And that just trickles down into schools. In order for kids to play well together on the playground or to maximize everything that they're learning within the classroom, a calm, respectful environment, it benefits all kids, whether or not they are struggling with mental illness or toxic stress, or whether they like I said before, have every advantage that they could possibly and don't have to struggle with those things. Yeah. It benefits all.
You know, I appreciate you saying that, because I think, you know, there's some fear in parents that, you know, if you're spending a lot of time explicitly teaching social emotional learning elements, you know, are you taking away from their ability to then know math and know reading and all these things that we think kids, you know, absolutely should have in order to be college ready. Mm-hmm. And so what I hear you saying is that it's almost a shift in paradigm in the way we think about what it means to be college ready. And it's not to say that these educational pieces aren't incredibly important, but we also have to open up our minds to these other elements that are so vital to helping kids be successful later in life. So it's not this concept of, oh, social emotional learning is needed just for kids who are struggling. It's needed for all kids to be explicitly taught, just the same way we would explicitly teach math or reading or writing.
Yeah, and for a long time, when social emotional learning first became more of a focus, and it's even a little bit hard for me to answer that because we've had some type of social emotional learning dedicated at our elementary levels for over 10 years. Yeah. So all of a sudden it's getting quite a bit of media attention, but it's been around forever. Because what we found is, and again, goes back over a decade, it is that those skills can be integrated into math, social studies, science, etc. But when we don't also have time reserved in our schedules to teach that, then we leave it up to chance. Yeah. And it's so important. Our employers have said it's so important. We believe that most families believe that it is important that their children are respectful and they get along with others, that we really made a commitment to having a specific time where that is taught.
Yeah, and I also think about it from the lens of prevention. Right, and this proactive approach to mental health. You know, we here at Tanager have the RISE Wellness and Resilience framework, and we have social emotional development within that framework. But when I look at really the power behind wellness and resilience, it is about having this element of emotional intelligence, about being able to navigate your world and to have relationships and interpersonal skills. And that often can be a protective factor to mental health, right? Because if we look at the indicators of well-being in RISE, it's about being able to feel safe and to have connection and belonging. It's hard to have connection and belonging if I don't know how to have relationships. It's hard to feel safe if I don't know how to ask for my needs in an appropriate way. And so it's this interconnection to a buffer and a protective factor to keeping kids well. Do you think that everybody sees it that way, or what more do we need to do to really inform and bring awareness towards the importance of this and everybody's role in cultivating this in our youth?
I would say if we're thinking within schools, that whole idea of understanding the importance of resilience and building student resilience is part of what all educators should know and be able to do. So at College Community, we think about the ARCH model, which is very, very similar in terms of attachment is what the A stands for. So who is the student connected to, and are those relationships helping that student thrive, or are there some negative influences that we can somehow reshape and support? Regulation, so when they encounter some type of difficulty, are they automatically leaving the classroom? Are they throwing something down? Or are they able to stop and take a breath and kind of think through, how am I feeling and how can I get back to baseline? Competence is something that when we think of schools, we often think, oh, competence and like reading and math and writing and social studies, but we like to broaden that and think of competence as also what are they gifted in terms of fine arts ability and talents and interests and practicing. What about athletics? How are they, we maybe say, you know, they navigate a community or a neighborhood really, really well. Like we might think street smarts, like they just have a lot of common sense and they can really work well in their community. And then health would be the other factor of ARCH, and are they getting the mental health care and the physical health care that they need? And when educators understand that, they can look at an individual student and think about what is helping and what is hurting in terms of a student's attachment and regulation skills, their competence and their health. And exactly, they're all so interconnected. But when we think of it through that lens, then educators have a place to go for a point of action.
Yeah.
So it's not, well, some kids have it and some kids don't. It's every kid has some protective factors. Every kid has some things that are challenging in their home and school environment and community environment. Where can we intervene and help support?
Yeah, and we can cultivate those protective factors. That's a really inspiring thing, right? We have a lot of power and potential between how we show up and how we cultivate those things. You know, you live day in, day out in this system. What are the needs? What do you still see as the unmet needs that are potentially detrimental towards the future of our youth?
Well, one of the needs that we have, and I don't think it's exclusive to our area, I believe that it's statewide, is a type of system in terms of supporting students with the most significant mental health needs. And so when we have students that go into some type of residential placement for a mental illness, they go into residential placement for eating disorder, they're just not safe for themselves health-wise, or they're not safe around others. We need a flexible system so that we can continue to support them educationally. So that's an area that we really need to focus on regionally here, and then also as a state. That's a need. Another need is always going to be on the prevention side of things.
Yeah.
So educating more people and faster on the importance of resilience and the importance of those environments that can support every student, regardless of what they're working through. And then also from that Tier 2 level and Tier 3 level, more support for addressing early on the mental health needs that our students have.
So really seeing a need and matching it with the appropriate resources and services. And, you know, I see a lot about just lack of resources and services, that there is this gap between the amount of needs that there are with the appropriate amount of services in place. Is that something you guys are experiencing?
We do see that. Schools are very skilled at making the most of the resources that they have.
I can imagine.
And yes, we would definitely be in need of additional resources. So, you know, there's not a person at a school building ever that is looking around for something to do. And I would say when we have solid infrastructure within a district, like we do in my district, for maximizing all of the resources that we have available, you can see even with that optimization, there still definitely is a greater need.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I hear about a lot is higher education and how they are helping cultivate our next generation of teachers and educators, especially as it relates to awareness around mental health and social emotional learning and the needs and brain development of youth in adversity. Do you think we've made progress with this over the last 5 to 10 years, or what work left do we need to do to ensure teachers come out ready to educate the kids who are now in their classrooms today?
We know we have made progress because within the legislation, within the last 5 years, I would say it was a requirement of teacher preparation programs to educate upcoming teachers on adverse childhood experiences and the effects of toxic stress. So that was one big piece of very identifiable progress that those of us that have been working in this field for a while have seen. So that's one piece. But I don't know, because I haven't been in a teacher prep program for 25 years, exactly the ins and outs of what our upcoming teachers are experiencing in terms of coursework. I would say that the more our beginning teachers or upcoming teachers can be present in classrooms and seeing what the real work is like, and understanding that they probably need to put more pressure on their education college staff to prepare them for the level of need that we're seeing in schools now, the better. Because nothing can replace that firsthand experience of really working with students.
You know, a lot of teachers will say to me, you know, I feel like a teacher and a social worker, or I feel like a teacher and a therapist. You know, the mental health world is going to have to look over the next decade at how we envision mental health care in our communities, because as you said, the amount of need compared to the available services is just not matched, especially for vulnerable populations and kids on Medicaid. Where do you think we can, as a community, start to fill those gaps? What can we do to take community action to ensure that the kids sitting in your building have the resources they need to then be able to more readily receive an education, which in turn allows them to go out and be successful contributing adults in our community.
When you say advocacy, the number one thing I think about, just because of what we've always been told, and it's true, is that we need to be more active with our legislators on helping our representatives see what the needs really are, because it's very, very easy to become disconnected from the realities of day-to-day life in education and in the mental health field. I would say that, and I know they're very, very busy people, but when we're only relying on our experience as kids in schools and assuming that that's how things are these days, that can lead us to have a very inaccurate picture of the level of needs that kids have. As I mentioned, COVID is one of those factors that really brought this into the spotlight, but it was happening before COVID. We just know that our world is just becoming more and more stressful for everyone to operate in. And so we have seen some movement with the legislature, but we do need to see more. So any advocacy that families can bring about with that is so welcomed. The other piece is each person understanding the importance of reducing the stigma associated with mental illness, because sometimes this is something that people don't really talk about front and center. That's definitely improving. But for parents to share their stories of what it's like to raise a young child and through the school system and in their home that's struggling with mental illness, and those stories really make a difference.
Yeah, one of the things I hear you say, Laura, is just lifting up youth voices. I think we've had kind of this concept over 50 years, children are seen, they're not heard. And I think we're getting to a new era, where kids have more access to sharing their perspective and their voices. And I hear you saying just how important that is, because when I went to school, it looks different now. When my mom went to school, it looks different now. How do we remain curious to hear what people's experiences are and what people's needs are? But that curiosity allows us to also reduce that stigma and that preconceived notion of what it means to struggle or to be facing mental health challenges. What is any advice you'd have to help elevate youth voice, or how can community members really get involved to understand what advocacy needs to be done for youth, and especially as it relates to the education setting?
We involved some students not too long ago in talking to us about this very topic from a school setting specifically. So what is it about school that causes anxiety in you or causes anxiety in your peers? What can the adults do in schools to alleviate some of those feelings? And in the end, I think one of our culminating questions was, what do you want your teachers and other school staff to know about what it's like to be a high schooler in 2023? And they had such different responses, but common in the sense that there was always a thread of relationships and connection. So educators, most of the educators that I have ever worked with, they just have such a deep respect for kids. And the perspectives that they bring. It's why they got into education. And so I would say, when you're asking what can the community do, any community group that you're a part of, I think a good question is, anybody talking to the students? Are we listening to what they have to say? Or are we dismissing that because they're young and they don't know and they haven't lived? Well, they are living. It is the real world for them. We're not preparing for the real world. We're in it, and we should listen to what they have to say.
How do we take care of teachers, Laura? When they are showing up in spaces and they're wearing a nurse hat, a social worker hat, an educator hat, how as a community can we take care of them? Because they're taking care of our youth, right? So when we talk about all of these pieces, it's such a youth focus, but the reality is that we can only give as much as we're all so well. How can we take better care of our teachers?
That goes back to the resource question. So most teachers see themselves as fulfilling multiple roles. I am here to educate this student, teach them how to read, teach them how to write, teach them all about U.S. history and all of those topics. I'm here for that, but I'm also here for the child. And when the needs of the student go beyond what a teacher feels equipped to support, that's where we have to systemically have other services that are there to come in and step in. Most educators I work with don't envision, I'll take care of this academic piece, and someone else will take care of all the rest. They just don't think in those ways. They got into the profession because they do love kids. They want to support them in a multifaceted way. But it's really hard on educators when there aren't enough services and supports to go around, and you see a child bearing the brunt of that lack of resources. That is hard.
I can imagine, how draining that is when you have such care and concern for a kiddo and know that there are not then the resources available or the support available to really make a difference, that can certainly influence our sense of efficacy and our own sense of meaning and purpose, which is all about ourselves being well. And so what I hear you saying is resources for students, resources for teachers, that when we come together as our more whole community and that we show up being more curious and being able to have available resources, we can be more well. Laura, I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today. Is there anything else that you want to add that we didn't get to?
The only thing I would say is that because we've gotten a little bit of attention in the media here recently as far as just what happens in schools, and that seems to be a bit of a political talking point even, which is so unusual, I would just say any educator within the district where you're located would love to just talk with you about what they see and experience. If you have a question, if you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, give us a call, because we're really busy taking care of the kids in the community and don't really have time to kind of defend that misinformation that can be out there, even on national news all the time. And so give us a call and we'll be able to tell you what policies are, what practices are, and almost all of the time if we have a conversation about that, whomever I'm talking to feels really good about the state of public education because they know that kids are being well cared for.
Relationships, relationships, relationships. Lean into that connection. Be curious, ask questions, and show up and help.
We would love that.
Well, Laura, thank you again so much for being here, a part of this initiative.
Thank you.
No matter the challenges you and your family face, Tanager is here for you. Our team of specialists in mental, emotional, behavioral, and social health want to join alongside you during these tough times. Tanager will offer the tools needed to inspire, empower, and heal, while providing the support you need to build the strongest foundation for success and wellness. We'll meet you wherever you are in your journey, and together define a path to reach your goals. Together we rise. Tanager. Inspire, empower, heal.
Thank you again for joining us today and for spending time with us. We hope today's segment offered hope and healing. Today's series brought to you by Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning. For more information, please visit our website at www.tanagerplace.org.